They never told us what happened after the longships vanished over the horizon. We hear of burning villages, slaughtered men, the terror of sails stitched with dragon heads, but the real story was whispered in the shadows, buried in silence. What became of the queens and princesses, the daughters of empires, when the Vikings carried them away? Their names were erased, their fates forbidden to speak. Some were sold in markets where no one knew their lineage. Some rose to power in foreign courts, and others simply vanished, leaving only silence in the chronicles. This is the untold story, and once you hear it, you'll never look at history the same way again. The year is 845, and Paris is burning. Imagine the clang of church bells ringing wildly, not for mass, but for warning, their iron tongues echoing across the Seine. The Vikings have arrived, led by the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, and the Frankish city trembles. Yet hidden beneath the clash of swords and the cries of citizens is another story, one the chroniclers only dared hint at, the fate of women taken behind those oak-planked shields. We know the names of kings who negotiated ransoms, and monks who recorded miracles. But the princesses, the daughters of noblemen, their stories disappear the moment they're dragged past the city gates. Why? Was it shame? Was it fear? Or was it the quiet erasure of women who no longer fit the image of purity and lineage that medieval empires wanted preserved? Close your eyes and see it. A Frankish noblewoman, perhaps only 17, dressed in linen embroidered with silver thread, standing on the banks of the Seine. Her father has been killed in the skirmish, her brothers scattered, and the raiders close in. The chronicles say nothing of her name, but you can imagine the rough hands, the shouting in Old Norse, the tug of her hair as she's pulled onto the ship. For her, the siege doesn't end when Ragnar accepts his ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver. For her, it begins there. Here lies the forbidden truth. Viking conquests were not only about land and gold. They were about people, women most of all. The sagas, when read carefully, are filled with quiet references. She was taken in the raid. She bore him sons. She was given as a gift to an ally. The polite phrases masked brutality. The language of abduction softened into the language of trade. But here's the twist you were never told. In school, some of these noblewomen, torn from their worlds, did not vanish into silence. Some became queens in foreign lands. Some carried bloodlines that reshaped dynasties, and others, tragically, lived their lives as shadows, erased so thoroughly that even their descendants never knew their royal origin. If you were there, on that ship, listening to the waves slap against the hull, what would you have done? Would you jump into the icy water, knowing you'd never make the shore? Or would you cling to the hope that survival, even in captivity, meant a chance to leave your mark in ways history would never admit? The chronicles of the Anglo-Saxons tell us of Glade, daughter of Alfred the Great, who was nearly carried off in a Viking raid. She survived only because her guards managed to spirit her away. But others were not so fortunate. Some daughters of kings ended up in the slave markets of Hiddeby or Dublin markets, where Irish queens stood side by side with nameless village girls, stripped of rank by the blunt reality of chains. Think of Dublin in the 10th century, its harbour thick with the smell of tar and fish, the shouting of traders in Norse, Gaelic, and Arabic. Among the goods, amber, walrus, ivory, swords, silks, there are women lined up, inspected like livestock. Somewhere in that crowd could be a princess, once addressed as Your Grace, now reduced to a price in silver. Yet survival has its strange ironies. Some of these women were purchased by powerful men, married into clans, and became mothers of future rulers. Their children, born of conquest, carried two bloodlines, the nobility of one empire and the ambition of another. History never recorded the trauma of their mothers, but the political consequences lived on in every alliance. Every inheritance, every war sparked by contested claims. Mini-twist. Historians now believe that some of these unions were quietly woven into dynasties we think of as purely native. What if the blood of Viking captors and their noble captives still flows through modern royal families? The tragedy, though, is that the women themselves disappear as individuals. Their names vanish from charters, their portraits never painted, their prayers unrecorded. Imagine being erased so thoroughly that your only proof of existence is the political power of a son who never knew the truth of his mother's suffering. And here's a detail that chills the blood. Medieval law codes in Scandinavia mention compensation for abducted women, not as individuals, but as property disputes between men. A princess could be worth more ransom than a farmer's wife, but in the eyes of the law, both were assets transferred, not voices lost. Now, think of silence as an empire itself. Silence grows when records are burned, when chroniclers omit names, when families refuse to speak of their lost daughters. The silence around these vanished queens is louder than any battlefield, and still, in the cracks of that silence, stories seep through. Archaeologists uncover graves in Viking settlements where women are buried with silk from Byzantium, brooches of Frankish style, or Christian crosses beside Thor's hammer. Who were they? Noblewomen, perhaps, taken and married into Norse society, adapting, surviving, reshaping identities in a foreign land. The grave goods whisper, she was not just anyone. She carried memory across oceans. If you listen closely, the wind through the fjords still seems to carry their questions. Were they victims or survivors? Did they hold onto their languages in secret songs? Did they tell their children stories of the lands they would never see again? The truth is, we will never know all their names. But in the absence of names, we have echoes. And those echoes lead us into darker, deeper waters, into the very heart of how empires fall, and how women carried their shattered pieces across horizons. And so, as Paris paid its ransom and the longships slipped back into the mist, the story of the noble daughters truly began, not in chronicles, but in shadows, because what happened next would shape kingdoms in ways their captors never imagined. The year is 865, and the great heathen army has landed on English soil. Imagine it, waves of warriors pouring across the countryside, their banners streaked with ravens, their longships dragging themselves onto the mudflats like monsters from the sea. Kings will be toppled, monasteries will burn, and hidden in the chronicles, barely whispered, are the women whose lives would be rewritten forever. But let's begin not with the roar of battle, but with silence. A silence inside the halls of Northumbria, where Queen Glaufleed waits, clutching a rosary of carved bone. Outside, the smoke rises from villages already plundered, and she knows, as queens always know, that the walls will not hold. What the chronicles tell us is that the king was slain, but what they do not describe is what happened to his wife and daughters. Did they flee into the night? Did they hide in monasteries disguised as nuns? Or were they, like so many others, carried across the sea into lives unrecognizable? Here lies the truth the scribes could not bring themselves to write. Noblewomen were prizes of conquest. their fates sealed not by the sword, but by the politics of blood. For the Vikings, a captured princess was more than a woman. She was a bargaining chip, a living thread into dynasties they longed to destabilize or join. Close your eyes and see it. A Viking chieftain, his beard streaked with ash, grips the arm of a trembling young princess. Around them, warriors laugh as they divide treasure, coins scattering across the rush-strewn floor. But this girl, she is worth more than silver. She carries legitimacy. She carries alliances. She carries the possibility of sons who could one day claim a throne. It is easy to forget, from our modern vantage point, just how fragile the lines of succession were. A single marriage could bind empires together. A single child could shift the balance of power. Now imagine what it meant when those marriages were forced. When those children were born not in palaces, but in foreign halls of timber and smoke, mini-twist. Some of the most powerful Viking leaders may have owed their status not just to raids, but to the noblewomen they captured and absorbed into their lineages. The sagas whisper of wives who came from distant lands, women whose names were quickly replaced with Norse ones, whose true origins were buried in silence. But not all vanished quietly. Take the tale of Melkorka, an Irish princess recorded in the Laxdilla saga. She was captured and enslaved, sold as a concubine in Iceland. For years she said nothing, earning the name the mute thrall. Yet one night her son overheard her speaking in fluent Gaelic. The truth spilled out. She was no servant, but the daughter of a king. Think of the weight of that moment. A royal bloodline reduced to silence, suddenly roaring back in the words of a mother to a child. Her son Elafar would grow to become a man of power, his legacy rooted in the dignity his mother reclaimed with that confession. If you were there, standing in that smoky Icelandic hall, hearing Melkorka reveal her secret, would you believe her? Or would you, like so many others, dismiss the idea that a king's daughter could be hidden in rags? This is the cruel paradox. Queens and princesses could be both erased and indispensable. They were exploited, yet they held the keys to future power. Their erasure was deliberate, their silence strategic, because to admit their suffering was to admit how fragile the noble order truly was. But the sagas, despite themselves, could not erase the echoes. Again and again you find strange fragments. A woman described as of noble bearing, a foreign tongue woven into a child's speech, a necklace of unusual design found in a Scandinavian grave. These fragments whisper, she mattered. Now let's move south, to the kingdom of Mercia, where alliances were the only weapon against Viking power. Here, noble daughters were offered willingly in marriage, hoping to bind raiders into peace. But imagine the cost for the young women themselves. Imagine being told you would marry not a knight of your land, but a man who had once raided your villages, who spoke in a foreign tongue, whose gods demanded blood on the stones. Would you see yourself as a diplomat, a savior of your people? Or would you feel betrayed, bartered like coin? Mini-twist. Some of these alliances worked. In York, where the Vikings carved out their own kingdom, noble women from Anglo-Saxon lines became mothers of children who were neither wholly Norse nor wholly English. Out of blood and compromise, a new identity emerged, one that blurred the line between captor and captive. But there were darker fates still. The annals of Ulster record women taken across the sea, never seen again. Think of the Irish coastline, mothers screaming from the shore as their daughters vanish over the horizon. For those women, there was no return. Their names were lost, their bodies absorbed into foreign lands. Their only legacy was the silence of the communities that mourned them. And yet, archaeology does not lie. In settlements like Jorvik and Hiddeby, we find the traces of women whose dress, jewelry, and burial rites do not match local traditions. Foreign-born, yet honored in death. Could these be the vanished daughters, assimilated into Norse society, yet remembered enough to be laid to rest with dignity? The deeper you dig, the clearer the pattern becomes. These women were not only victims, they were agents of transformation, unwilling or not. Through them, cultures blended, languages mixed, faiths collided. Without them, there would be no hybrid kingdoms, no Norse-Irish dynasties, no melting of Saxon and Viking into something new. But here is the chilling question: why do we only know them through fragments, through whispers and bones? Why were their voices never written? Perhaps because their stories threatened the stability of the narratives men wanted to preserve. To admit that queens and princesses were stolen, forced into lives of silence or compromise, was to admit that power was fragile, that bloodlines were porous, that empire itself was vulnerable. And so, chapter by chapter, chronicle by chronicle, their stories were erased. But silence has cracks, and in those cracks, truth grows, as the great heathen army swept across England. As kings fell and treaties shattered, the daughters of those empires carried the true scars of conquest. And though their names do not survive, their legacy bleeds into every lineage, every story of survival, every unexpected twist of power that followed, because what happened next in the courts of Wessex, in the slave markets of Dublin, in the smoky halls of Iceland, would reveal just how much the vanished daughters could shape the destiny of kingdoms. The year is 911. Along the banks of the River Seine, another treaty is signed, another kingdom forced to bend. King Charles the Simple of West Francia makes a desperate gamble. He grants land to the Viking leader, Rollo, the very raider who once terrorized his shores. This bargain, written in ink and blood, will give birth to Normandy. And yet, hidden inside the treaty is a quieter clause, one almost whispered, one that tells us everything about the fates of noblewomen. For Rollo does not only take land, he takes a wife, and not just any wife, Gisela, the daughter of the king. Imagine the scene: a Frankish court, its stone halls echoing with Latin prayers, where silk-clad priests and trembling nobles look on as a Viking, tall and broad, kneels beside a princess. To them, this is humiliation. To her, it is exile without leaving her homeland. What must it have felt like to marry the man who once burned her villages, to lie beside the terror of her childhood? The chronicles do not tell us her thoughts. They do not even agree if she truly existed, or if her story was a later invention. And yet, whether real or symbolic, her figure embodies the truth. Daughters of empires were not just stolen, they were bartered, their bodies written into treaties as though they were signatures themselves. Here lies the forbidden truth. Peace was often sealed not by words or coins, but by women's lives. A princess handed to a conqueror was the living embodiment of surrender, and once given, she vanished into the foreign household, her identity consumed by the new order she was forced to serve. Mini twist: while some chroniclers describe Gisela as dutiful, there are whispers that she resisted. Some accounts claim she refused Rollo's bed for years, a silent protest. Others insist that she bore him children who became the bloodline of Normandy, eventually producing William the Conqueror himself. And so we are left with a question that haunts history. Was she the unwilling foundation of a dynasty, or a ghost invented to give legitimacy to the conqueror's heirs? Now step back from the court and into the streets of Rouen, where Viking settlers and Frankish citizens uneasily mix. Here too are noblewomen, but theirs is a fate far less visible. Captured in raids, sold in markets, absorbed into households, they leave behind no treaties, no chronicles. Yet their influence is hidden in plain sight. Archaeologists uncover graves in Normandy where women are buried with both Norse brooches and Frankish crosses, a blend of identities. These women, perhaps once princesses or noble daughters, became the mothers of children who carried two worlds in their blood. And here's the chilling irony. While the men of power negotiated boundaries and armies, it was the silent lives of these women that truly fused cultures together. Their lullabies, their prayers, their foreign customs smuggled into the hearth. These shaped the identities of generations more deeply than treaties ever could. If you were there, walking through Rouen's muddy streets, hearing the mingling of languages, Old Norse, Old French, Latin, would you recognize that you were witnessing the birth of something new? Or would you see only captives and conquerors, unable to imagine that out of such violence could come the foundations of kingdoms? Mini-twist, the Normans, who would one day conquer England in 1066, owed their very existence to the union, willing or unwilling, between Viking men and the noblewomen, given or taken in marriage. Without these vanished daughters, there would be no Duke of Normandy, number William the Conqueror, no reshaping of the English crown. But the cost for the women themselves was unspeakable. In the monastic chronicles, there is an undercurrent of sorrow. Monks write not of individuals, but of our daughters, lamenting how they are defiled by the heathens. To the Church, the loss was not just personal but spiritual. Noble women taken from Christendom into pagan halls, their faith endangered, their purity shattered. Yet this framing obscures their resilience. Did these women truly abandon their faith? Or did they whisper Latin prayers in secret, teaching their children both the cross and the hammer? The silence of records may be deliberate. For medieval kings and chroniclers, to admit that their daughters were taken, married, or sold was to admit weakness, to fracture the image of divine authority. Better to erase them, to let their names vanish, than to immortalize shame. And so, history becomes a wall of silence, behind which countless lives are buried. But silence is not absence. Consider the story of Olga of Kiev, who married into the Varangian Rus, themselves descendants of Norse raiders. When her husband was murdered, she did not vanish. She seized power, ruling with cunning and cruelty, avenging his death by burning enemy envoys alive, drowning others, and razing entire towns. A noble woman turned regent, she wielded the violence of conquest herself. If one princess could seize the narrative, how many others, unrecorded, might have shaped their new worlds in ways unseen? If you were her, a widow surrounded by enemies, a foreigner in a foreign land, would you shrink into silence, or would you carve out vengeance with fire and steel? The motif of fire returns again and again in these stories. Cities burned in raids, villages torched in reprisal, but the fire also burned silently, inside the noblewomen carried away. Some flames flickered quietly in lullabies and prayers. Others raged openly, like Olga's, reshaping empires. By the end of the 10th century, Viking raids had shifted. No longer mere plunder, they became invasions, settlements, dynasties. And with this shift came new fates for captured noblewomen. No longer just slaves, they became pawns in dynastic marriages, their bloodlines carefully woven into new kingdoms. Yet the irony remains. Whether as slaves or as queens, their voices were not their own. And so, in Normandy, in Kiev, in Dublin, we find the same pattern: vanished daughters, erased names, legacies hidden in plain sight. Their silence was forced, their stories suppressed. But without them, the great movements of history would collapse. As the chapter closes, imagine a candle guttering in a Frankish chapel. A priest prays for the soul of a lost princess, never to be seen again. Outside, the streets hum with new voices, new children born of conquest. The priest does not know it, but those children will shape the world more than his prayers ever will, because what came next in England, in Ireland, in the far reaches of Byzantium, would reveal just how far the vanished daughters had travelled, and how deeply they had changed the world they were stolen from. The year is 941, and the Black Sea is restless. On its waters glide the longships of the Varangian Rus, Viking descendants who now ruled the rivers of Eastern Europe. Their oars dip in unison, their shields catch the sunlight, and their ambitions stretch toward Constantinople itself, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Here, the fate of noblewomen takes yet another turn, one that pulls us deep into the politics of survival and the shadows of forgotten queens. Picture Constantinople, its golden domes glinting like fire in the distance, the scent of incense drifting from Hagia Sophia. Within these walls, emperors marry with ceremony, and princesses are cloistered in gilded chambers. Yet outside, on the rivers, Varangian mercenaries and raiders circle like wolves. Between them lies a corridor of fate for captured women. For here, the Viking hunger collides with the Byzantine obsession for diplomacy, and daughters of empires become bridges between worlds. Take Anna, sister of Emperor Basil II, her marriage in 988 to Vladimir of Kiev. A ruler of Varangian descent, was not the union of equals but of necessity. Byzantium needed warriors. Vladimir wanted legitimacy. And so Anna, born in purple, heir to 1,000 years of Roman tradition, was sent north into a world of wooden halls, pagan feasts, and unfamiliar tongues. Imagine her, draped in silk, stepping onto the banks of the Dnieper, her hand clutching a jeweled cross. To her people, this was a humiliation, an imperial daughter married to a barbarian. To him, she was a prize beyond measure. Twist, that union, born of political desperation, sparked the Christianization of the Kievan Rus. Vladimir converted to orthodoxy, dragging his people with him, because Anna refused to marry a pagan. A single woman, her fate seemingly diminished by exile, altered the spiritual destiny of an entire civilization. But what was her life like, truly, in Kiev? The chronicles praise her piety, her role as mother of the faithful, yet they do not whisper of her isolation, her struggle to adapt, her longing for Constantinople. Did she stand at night on the wooden balcony of her new palace, staring into the forests, clutching her rosary, asking herself how she had become the hinge on which history turned? If you were her, torn from marble halls into timber ones, would you see yourself as a prisoner or as a queen remaking the world? Anna's story is extraordinary, but it also exposes a deeper truth. Captured or bartered noblewomen were not merely absorbed. They became engines of transformation. Through them, cultures shifted, religions spread, dynasties rebranded themselves. the very thing designed to silence them, their forced unions, became the secret lever by which they shaped the future. Yet the cost was enormous. For every Anna remembered faintly in chronicles, there were countless others unnamed. Viking slave markets in Crimea and Constantinople bustled with women of noble birth, sold to Byzantine households, Persian traders, even caliphs in Baghdad. Their stories vanish into silence. But imagine the scale of it. A Frankish princess brushing past an Irish queen in the narrow confines of a Constantinople market, neither knowing the other's name, both reduced to commodities. Twist. Arab chroniclers mention pale-skinned slave girls. Roussiars sold in Baghdad for enormous sums, prized for their beauty and rarity. Some may have been noblewomen, captured in raids 1,000 miles away. Their children, absorbed into Islamic courts, carried fragments of vanished dynasties across continents. The motif of distance grows stronger here. These women were carried far beyond the lands of their birth, their identities dissolving as they crossed rivers and seas. Each horizon stole more of their names until they became shadows, remembered only in the language of trade, but even in exile, some carved their mark. Consider Ingard Olofsdotter of Sweden, given in marriage to Yaroslav, the wise of Kiev, in 1019, though not a captive in the traditional sense. Her marriage was born of Viking politics and dynastic tension. She transformed Kiev into a center of diplomacy, her daughters marrying kings of Norway, Hungary, and France. Through her, the blood of the North seeped into every royal court of Europe. A single woman, bartered across borders, became the grandmother of empires. What the sagas and chronicles do not admit is how much of this power rested on the shoulders of women. Men boasted of battles. Women bore dynasties. Men carved their names into stones. Women whispered bloodlines into cradles. And without them, the empires of the north and east would crumble. If you stood in Constantinople's great palace, hearing the chants of Hagia Sophia echo in the night, would you realize that beyond those marble walls, in smoky halls of Kiev and Novgorod, it was the vanished daughters who were weaving together the fate of Europe? Yet silence endures. We know Anna's name because she was born imperial. We know Ingard's because her daughters sat on thrones. But what of the nameless ones sold in markets, carried into harems, vanishing into anonymity? Their influence is invisible but undeniable. Their sons and daughters carried fragments of their heritage, unknowingly shaping languages, customs, even the blood of kings. Twist. Genetic studies of remains from Viking settlements in England and Ireland reveal markers of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern descent. Could it be that the traffic of noblewomen and slaves into Byzantium and beyond eventually looped back, their descendants settling in the very lands from which they were stolen? The vanished daughters may have returned, not in person, but in blood, and so the silence becomes a labyrinth. We cannot trace every path, but we can sense its shape. Noblewomen captured, bartered, vanished, and yet through them, dynasties shifted, empires rose, faiths transformed. Their names may be lost, but their fingerprints are everywhere. The fire motif returns. Constantinople burns in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. Centuries later, but the echoes stretch back to these women. The fire of conquest consumed their names. Yet in its ashes grew new empires, new bloodlines, seeded by those same vanished daughters. As chapter 4 closes, picture Anna Porphyrogeneta standing on a wooden balcony in Kiev, gazing at the northern sky. Around her, the city sleeps, its people unaware that their faith, their identity, their very destiny hinges on her presence. She whispers a prayer in Greek, the stars cold above her. And in that whisper lies the echo of every noblewoman carried away, erased yet indispensable, because what came next in England's shattered crowns, in Ireland's burning coasts, in the chaos of Normandy's ambition, would prove that the vanished daughters were not just survivors of conquest. They were the secret architects of kingdoms. The year is 1014, and the winds of Ireland howl with fire and steel. At Clontarf near Dublin, Viking warlords and Irish kings clash in one of the bloodiest battles of the age. The annals speak of shields splintering, rivers clogged with bodies, and the old High King Brian Boru meeting his death in prayer. Yet beneath the thunder of swords lies another story, quieter but no less devastating, the fate of noblewomen, taken in raids that scarred Ireland for generations. Imagine the Irish coastline before the storm, its monasteries filled with illuminated manuscripts, its hills dotted with stone-ringed forts. Now picture longships sweeping in like wolves of the sea, their hulls black with tar, their sails billowing like wings. They come not only for gold chalices and relics, but for the noblest prize of all daughters, daughters of kings, of abbots, of chieftains, women whose capture was both humiliation and strategy. The Irish chronicles are filled with laments. In the annals of Ulster, scribes write of maidens of noble birth carried away, their fates unrecorded. In the annals of the Four Masters, the grief is sharper. Great was the capture of women, wives and maidens, and they were carried away into bondage. The silence after these lines is unbearable. Where did they go? What became of them? Mini-twist, Dublin itself became one of the largest slave markets in Europe, run by the very Vikings who raided the Irish coasts. In its crowded streets, Irish princesses stood side by side with captives from England, Scotland, and even as far as Iberia. Here, rank dissolved into price. The daughter of a high king could be auctioned beside a farmer's wife. Her worth measured not in lineage, but in silver. Picture it, the wooden docks of Dublin, alive with shouting traders, the smell of seaweed and sweat. A young noblewoman, her hair still braided with ribbons of her clan, stands trembling as men haggle over her fate. One offers a chest of coins, another a necklace of amber. Her entire world, her identity as the daughter of Ireland, reduced to numbers in a ledger. And yet, the story does not end at the market. Many of these women were taken into Norse households, their lineage absorbed into new dynasties. Some bore children who would one day become rulers themselves. In this way, the noble blood of Ireland seeped into the veins of Viking colonies, reshaping identities in ways the scribes dared not write. If you were there, standing among the crowd, watching your sister sold into a foreign tongue, would you leap forward, knowing you'd be cut down in an instant? Or would you stay silent, praying that somehow her blood would survive and return in another form? Mini-twist, archaeological finds in Dublin reveal brooches of Irish craftsmanship buried in Viking graves, sometimes clasped to women's remains. Were these noble captives honored in death? Or were they tokens of memory, women who carried their homeland into exile and wove it into their new identities? The pattern grows darker still. The sagas, written in Iceland, tell stories of women taken from Ireland and Scotland, their voices silenced, their names changed. One such tale describes Aud the deep-minded, a woman of noble birth whose family was shattered by Norse conquest. and yet she carved her own fate. Widowed and exiled, she sailed across the seas, establishing settlements in Iceland, ruling as a matriarch. A rare case of a woman taking power in the wake of destruction. But how many others were not so fortunate? The motif of silence deepens. In Irish poetry, women taken by Vikings are often compared to birds, stolen from their nests, their songs muted. Yet even in silence, they carried memory. They taught their children the stories of Ireland, the prayers of their people, the rhythm of their language. And in those whispers, the blood of Ireland survived within Viking courts. Now consider the paradox. To the Irish chroniclers, these women were martyrs of conquest, symbols of loss. To the Vikings, they were bridges, vessels of alliance, mothers of dynasties. Two narratives, one silenced, one celebrated, both hiding the truth of the women themselves. Twist. Some descendants of these unions rose to unexpected heights. Genetic studies reveal Irish markers in Norse royal bloodlines, suggesting that the vanished daughters of Ireland lived on in the very rulers who once sought to erase them. Their erasure was not total. It was transformed, disguised, hidden in plain sight. But imagine the cost for the women themselves. A daughter raised to be the pride of her clan, carried across the sea, forced into foreign customs. Did she still sing Irish lullabies in the dark? Did she carve secret crosses on wooden beams, clinging to her faith? Did she tell her children of the green hills she would never see again? The fire motif returns. Ireland burned, monasteries torched, manuscripts consumed, but the fire also lived in the hearts of these women. Some flickered with resistance, others raged with survival. Their fire burned in the children they bore, in the identities they preserved, even in exile. If you stood at Clontarf, watching the blood-soaked waves crash against the shore, would you see only the clash of kings? Or would you hear the quieter cries of the daughters, carried away, reshaping destiny from the shadows? By the time the battle ended and Brian Boru lay dead, the fate of Ireland had shifted forever. The Vikings would not conquer outright, but neither would they vanish. They would remain entangled in Irish bloodlines, their legacy written not only in battles, but in the silent endurance of the women they had taken. And so, Chapter 5 closes with a vision. Picture an Irish princess, her hands bound in rope, standing on a Viking ship as it sails west into the setting sun. Behind her, Ireland smoulders. Ahead of her, a world unknown. She is nameless to history, erased in chronicles, but her blood will ripple through generations. She is the vanished daughter, silent, but unforgettable, because what came next in Normandy's conquests, in England's collapse, in the forging of new empires, would prove that these women were not just captives. They were the secret mothers of kingdoms yet to rise. The year is 1066, and the winds of fate sweep across the English Channel. On one side, Harold Godwinson rallies his weary Saxon army. On the other, William of Normandy, descendant of Rollo, prepares to gamble everything on conquest. The banners snap in the wind, prayers rise to heaven, and history hangs on the edge of a sword. But hidden beneath the clash of Hastings lies a secret thread, the vanished daughters of earlier centuries, whose lives of silence and survival made this moment possible. For William's claim, his very bloodline, was stitched together through women given, taken, or erased. Remember Gisela, the Frankish princess who may have been bartered to Rollo. Whether she truly lived or not, her story was woven into Norman identity to justify their rule. Remember Anna of Byzantium, whose marriage converted a nation. Remember the nameless Irish queens sold in Dublin markets, their lineage absorbed into Norse bloodlines. William's destiny was not written solely in steel and banners. It was whispered in lullabies sung by mothers whose names the chronicles erased. Imagine Hastings. October 14th, the cries of battle rolling like thunder across the hills. Amid the blood and chaos, consider the irony. The Norman knights who thundered down upon the English do so carrying the hidden legacies of noblewomen once carried away in chains. Their silence echoes in every sword stroke, every arrow loosed, every prayer shouted to the sky. Twist. History tells us William won, because Harold's forces were exhausted from fighting at Stamford Bridge weeks earlier. But what if the deeper truth is this? William stood on a foundation built by vanished daughters. Without their forced unions, their mixed bloodlines, his dynasty could not claim legitimacy. The conquest of England was born not only on battlefields, but in the stolen chambers of queens. Now step away from Hastings, into the quieter halls of power after conquest. The Anglo-Saxon nobility shattered, Norman rule established, and once again, daughters of empires became pawns. Saxon princesses, once destined for thrones, were forced into marriage with Norman lords to secure the new order. Others were shipped across the Channel, never to return. Their voices disappear from English chronicles, replaced by silence. But silence does not mean absence. In monasteries, scribes lamented, "Our daughters are taken into the hands of strangers." Behind the lines of grief, there is a truth unspoken that these women, erased from record, were the very glue binding conquest into permanence. Without them, Norman rule might have faltered. With them, it endured. Twist. Centuries later, genetic studies reveal that Norman and Anglo-Saxon bloodlines intertwined rapidly after 1066. Proof of forced unions and marriages. The vanished daughters, once silent victims, became the hidden mothers of England's future kings and queens. Their legacy was both tragic and transformative, woven into the very fabric of a nation. The motif of fire returns one last time. Hastings smiled. Villages burn in William's harrying of the north. The chronicles tell of famine, corpses lining the roads, silence across the fields. But within that silence flickers another fire, the resilience of women carried into exile, enduring, surviving. Some whispered their native prayers into the ears of children who would one day sit on thrones. Others carved their memory into the smallest things, a woven pattern, a melody sung at night, a story passed in secret. If you were one of them, a Saxon princess, torn from your halls, sent to Normandy as a bride, would you despair? Or would you see yourself as a seed, planted in foreign soil, destined to grow roots that could not be torn away? The echoes of the vanished daughters stretch beyond Hastings, beyond England. Consider Sicily, conquered by Normans in 1091. Here again, noblewomen were carried into foreign courts, absorbed into dynasties that blended Norse, Frankish, Arab, and Byzantine blood. Their names vanish, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the languages spoken, the mosaics carved, the crowns worn by kings. Twist. By the 12th century, nearly every European royal court bore the blood of women once taken in conquest. Queens of Spain, France, and England alike carried traces of vanished daughters. Their silence was deliberate. Chroniclers never wrote their suffering, but their impact was unstoppable. And here lies the final forbidden truth. History as we know it is built on the backs of women who were erased. Every crown worn, every treaty signed, every kingdom risen was shaped by the silent endurance of daughters carried away. They were the bridges between empires, the hidden architects of dynasties, the ghosts in the genealogies of kings. As we step back, imagine one last scene. A medieval manuscript, its pages half burned. On one side, the names of kings and battles, written in neat Latin. On the other, empty space, the missing names of women who should have been remembered. But in the faint margins, a scribe has doodled a single shape, a bird, wings outstretched mid-flight. Perhaps he remembered. Perhaps he could not bear the silence. And so we end where we began, with the vanished daughters, erased in chronicles, silenced in courts, forgotten by design. Yet their legacy endures in every dynasty, every kingdom, every modern crown that still gleams today. Because history is not only the story of conquerors, it is the story of the women they carried away, the ones who vanished, and yet, in truth, never disappeared at all.